welcome. I'm Ruth Bancewicz, the Faraday Church Engagement Director. Welcome to Faraday Churches. Thank you for coming along tonight. We are so grateful for your support, and I hope that our Patreon supporters who may join us enjoy the benefit of joining in this conversation, and any special guests who've been invited along today to see what we do. And let's go right into this interview. At the end of the biblical book of Job, God declares his power and wisdom as creator. Scientists have actually begun to answer some of the questions posed in Job 38, which is the focus of this month's bite-sized resources. For example, verse 24 says, "Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that a flood of waters may cover you?" Well, we now have the technology of cloud seeding, which I'm sure today's guest can explain to us. But there's always so much more to learn. We cannot claim to have all-powerful knowledge of everything around us. God is the creator and sustainer of everything. Also, and more to the point, any new discovery only serves to remind us how amazing he is. So discussing this topic today, we have Revd Dr Dave Gregory. He studied physics and astrophysics at Leicester University and followed that by a PhD in astrophysics at atmospheric physics at Imperial College London. He worked for 15 years at the Met Office and the European Weather Centre. Then he went off to college again to become a Baptist minister, which he did for 20 years, and was a Baptist Union president from 2018 to 2019. And he actually stood down from local church ministry in 2022 to work as a Baptist missioner in science and the environment. He has done many other things, especially relating science and theology together. But the one I wanted to flag up is that he edited the Messy Church Does Science resource book, which I know is hugely popular. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Good to be here, Ruth.
Thanks, Dave. And my co-host today is Ben Norris, who is a church leader from Harlow. Ben has served in a number of churches in the UK and in South Africa, where his wife comes from. He's very musical and really values science and as scientific engagement with science in a church context. And he is into sound engineering as a professional background. So he has been cheering on our work with churches for some years. So it's high time he joined us. Welcome, Ben.
Hello, great to be here.
Great, thank you. So having introduced you, is there anything, Dave, else that you would like to tell us about yourself?
That's also a leading question, isn't it, really? I still have a great fascination about science as well as faith. So, over the weekend I was outside with my little telescope trying to spot this comet that is in our skies. It's got Shishan, I think it's called, and managed to see that through the telescope. But even better than that, just with my mobile phone camera, without the telescope, I managed to get a picture of it as well out of the bedroom window. So that was really exciting. And the other week, I had a police escort to see the aurora. Yeah, we could see it. We could see it from our back garden here, which because it was a huge solar storm that came off, and we could see red and green. But behind us, just down a lane, is a common area with a wood on the top. So we thought about 9:30 at night. It was very dark down there. We thought we'd go and see if we could get a better view and some better photographs. We're walking down a dark lane with our head torches on when a police car goes past us. It goes a little further, turns around and comes back, slows down as it gets to us, stops, and the window goes down. And the policeman says, "Are you all right?" And he said, "Yeah, we're going to see the aurora." And he said, "Aurora?" I said, "Yeah, do you want to come?" They got a minute. And he said, "Yeah, I think we do have a minute." So they parked up and they came to see the aurora with us. They were taking photographs for their colleagues and things like that. That was a great experience.
Getting the police to be excited about science. That's fantastic. And Ben, I'm actually feeling a bit self-conscious now. I've remembered that you're into sound technology, sound engineering, because I've got a really squeaky chair and I'm a bit
You have.
Yeah, hopefully it's not coming up on the Zoom. But that aside, is there anything else you want to tell us about yourself, Ben?
I completely missed the aurora. I drove home and there was a lady on the side of the road with her phone out up into the sky, but just across the road is a building site. So I'm like, this is a very strange thing to be taking photo of a building site. went to bed, woke up in the morning, and of course it's all over the social media feeds. I completely missed it.
What you need, Ben, is an app on your phone. I've got an app on the phone which gives me a warning when it's going to be a strong signal. So
there we go. There we go. That will be helpful. I think one thing to know about me really is that I don't come from a science background. I didn't have particularly good teachers at school when it came to science, so I didn't really have a love for it. But the older I've got, the more science and faith and how that works together intrigues me, and that's what passionately supporting Faraday and Ruth, and yeah, love to gain more understanding.
Great. And just to keep things even, tell you a couple of things about myself. I've got a little bit addicted to jigsaws recently. Just one of those things. And I'm quite good at them. And I don't know what good that does in life. Like skill at jigsaws. I don't know if it applies like skill at Lego. Clearly is useful for building flat pack furniture. Perfect training. But jigsaws, I have no idea. Unless you smash a vase and you actually want to build it again. I honestly cannot think what that's useful for. But anyway, moving swiftly on. I'm going to ask the first question, Dave. So you moved from professional science to ordained ministry. That's quite a big move. What got you doing that?
it's funny because people have said that to me over the years. It's a very big move, and yet for me it didn't seem that big at the time because I became a Christian while I was doing my PhD, and I was wondering what I should do with my life because as a Christian, you're supposed to ask God, what do you want me to do with my life? Well, that's what I thought. That's what I've been taught in my early Christian days. So I asked God what I should do, and all he says, I just want you to serve me. So I thought about ministry at the end of my PhD, but to be honest, I'd only been a Christian 2 years, so I thought I didn't know anything about faith. So I joined the Met Office. I did research. I applied to be a minister after about 4 years in my research career. Got turned down. Got promoted the next week at work to be a group leader. So I kind of took that as a sign. Well, maybe I was supposed to stay for a bit longer. I stayed for another 9 years in the Met Office doing research and spending time at the European Weather Centre. But through that time, I was involved in church leadership. So I was preaching, leading worship, was part of the leadership team at the church, got involved in a church plant that we planted in a local school. But at the end of that 9 years, it looked like I was going to get promoted at work again. And I thought if I was going to get promoted at work, something was going to have to give, and that was probably the church. So I had a choice to make at that point, and I explored going into ministry, and this time I was accepted to train as a Baptist minister. So that's what I did, but I didn't kind of leave the science behind. In fact, when I went for one of my interviews, you have to go for several interviews to be trained as a Baptist minister. When I went to see one of our area kind of ministers who oversaw the churches, as I was leaving the interview, he asked the question, how has working for the Met Office prepared you for ministry? Because nothing's lost in God's economy. And looking back, it was a really kind of prophetic moment. And I don't know if he knew it, but it was for me, because if I hadn't had 9 more years in research, I don't think I would have had this side of my life, science side of my life that I brought into ministry.
And so just to take this forward, Dave, the strapline for this month's resources was the more scientists learn about the way the world works, the more we can celebrate the one who made it all.
Yeah.
Would you word it like that? Would you say it differently? How do you unpack that or understand that?
I think there's truth in that. I know, I kind of began my journey back to faith through science. When I was at university, first of all doing physics, astrophysics, it was the astrophysics that started me thinking maybe there's a God behind all of this, because I was seeing this amazing cosmos and universe, which seemed so interconnected and so well shaped in the way it worked, that I thought, well, one day walk into a lecture, I thought, well, maybe there is a God. My next thought was, what's that got to do with me? But, and it took me three years to kind of explore faith and to reconnect with the faith community and to go to discussion groups with people. And part of that, I think it was, what science reveals of the world. It's an amazing thing. And to me, that speaks about God. So I think that statement is true. The more we learn about the way the world works, the more it gives us something to praise God for. But I think it's more than that. I've come to understand science is a very creative activity. It's a very playful activity. You're playing with ideas, you're playing with equipment, you're imagining things, you're thinking up new ideas and testing them out. I think that, there's something in that creativity of science and playfulness of science which matches the creativity and the playfulness of God that we see in creation. So I think actually doing science says something about who we are as human beings, actually. Our creativity, our acquisitiveness, which I think God has just placed within us to try and explore his world. The thing that I'm doing great, but I would want to question the more we learn about the way the world works. And I guess science is like that. Science is about the way the world works. But I guess in the last 2 years, I've been exploring a different way of engaging with science, which is less about how it works and more about how it makes us feel. So I've been exploring the issue of wonder. Which is an emotion, a feeling that most people get to an amazing sunset. Scientists get it to discovering something new. In fact, I spoke to a group of quite senior meteorologists a few years ago at a meal. They invited me to speak at their Christmas meal, and I spoke on wonder in science and faith. And I talked about the importance of wonder in science. And there were 30 very former colleagues, quite senior meteorologists. Most of them could talk about how wonder was a part of why they got into science. And I wonder if so I'm interested in exploring how that experience of wonder and how the diversity that we see in the world and how we have a sense that things fit together. How does that allow science to speak to us about the presence of God in the world, really? Rather than understanding the details of it, I guess I'm taking a step back and saying, well, this picture that science has got for us, this wondrous thing, how does that speak to us about God? So it's about using some of the imagery in an artistic way rather than a more technical way. As I said earlier, most people don't have a technical understanding of science. But I wonder what the audience figures were last night for Brian Cox's solar system. Or David Attenborough's last documentary about nature. People have this fascination, even if they don't have an understanding. And I wonder if we can use that fascination to God.
No, and definitely, the beauty of things, but also, I guess what I was digging at was the wonder that comes from understanding. But then there's also the wonder of just, it's an aurora. I know what it is, but it's pretty, and and as a scientist, you get to see stuff, data, be places where other people just wouldn't be, and I think people don't. This has been a trigger for quite a lot of my work. People don't realize how human scientists are. Why do you study this? Because they flower in Spain in the summer. Who doesn't want to go to Spain and field trips in the summer? Just total confession from one of my lecturers. Or Ben, I picked up on when you said you weren't really into science at school. No argument with that. Not everything floats everyone's boat, but you said you went for the more creative stuff. And yes, music is creative, but science. I wrote a whole book chapter on creativity in science, and just trying to help people see that the process of doing science, you have to solve problems, you have to think of ways to do things, you have to make equipment that doesn't really work, you have to find ways around things, there's teamwork, it's really social,
Yeah.
Unless you've got loads of money. You usually have to rely on a lot of people to help you, and you're packed into a very small space. And even if you've got loads of money, you probably just buy big machines and still share them with, lots of people, So it's I think people's impression of the process of science is really is like informed by Frankenstein, not like normal science.
And I think what you said there about, science is collaborative. I think that's true. Very few scientists work on their own. They're normally part of a team. If you've got a big piece of equipment like the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, there are thousands of people working on that, engineers, technicians, scientists. Science is a very collaborative, communal activity, actually, a bit like the church in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm picking up on something you said about, emotions and feelings, and I'm just thinking about Job 38, the passage, and Job thinks that he's got a wide enough perspective on how God should rule the world.
Yeah.
And then Job 38, God's response to Job involves a deep reflection on creation and kind of gives him this kind of cosmic view of the world. And really just love your thoughts on the passage, and if that, what strikes you in that.
I really feel sorry for Job, really, because he's spent over 30 chapters with his friends moaning and questioning God's wisdom. And then in chapter 38, God turns up and he never answers his questions.
Yeah.
All he does is take him on what I've started calling the first nature documentary, the first kind of David Attenborough experience, and it's God who is the narrator of this wondrous world of creation. And you would think, what is God doing there? How is God meeting Job in this terrible place he's at? And yet there's something in that experience of seeing the wonder of creation that at the end of it all, he turns around and he says, I've heard of you. And we hear a lot about God in church. But now my eyes have seen you. And there was something that, in that experience that God took him on, that tour of the oceans, the land, the skies, the wondrous creatures in it, that actually spoke to him about the wonder of God, the power of God, the glory of God, the majesty of God, in a sense. And maybe, science enables us to do the same kind of thing as well. I think we might answer God back slightly differently. Because I did put a quote from Job in the foreword of my PhD thesis, actually, I think from a couple of chapters earlier about the water cycle, because there's some science in Job, real science in Job. They knew some stuff. We might answer Job, do you know how God stretches out the clouds? Well, yes, a little bit. Do you know how God pours down rain from the clouds? Well, yes. But there's also more stuff to know. One of the most important questions, statements in science and actually faith is we don't know, because it drives you on to explore more, to discover more about creation through science, and more about God. So I don't want to kind of dismiss what God's doing in Job, because I think as scientists, sometimes we think we often talk about theory of everything and understanding everything. I'm not sure if science may ever get to that point. I wonder if science sometimes is a pass the parcel, an infinite pass the parcel. You rip off one layer and you understand a bit more, but there's still we don't know, and you have to rip off a bit more. I think science is like that. So I think in a world of science, I think what Job 38 is saying about the powerful, the wonder that there is in the world that God has placed in it, is still a valid thing for us to take heed of, and actually maybe brings a bit of humility to us in the entire process of science, because sometimes science can be a bit arrogant about what it says about the world, and it can be very definite I think one of the things I've grown up as I've gone further on in research and beyond that now is actually there's also things you don't know, but we don't highlight that. And when it comes to popular presentations, we don't highlight them at all. It's all very definite. So, I love these Job passages at the end. They just fascinate me. But I think we have to be a bit careful as well. Science literally means knowing. And it does enable us to know something about the world. But I'm not sure if this passage is fully about knowing in the terms of science. I think it's more knowing in the terms of wisdom. And I think in these words, there's an invitation to acknowledge the power and the grandeur and the glory of God. There's an invitation to trust in God's care as well, because he talks about limiting the power of the sea, which theologically, in the Bible is also a dangerous thing. In the Psalms, the power of the sea is dangerous, and it talks about limiting. So it's about trust there. And as I said earlier, for me, it's a very visual passage. So I think there's something about just training our eyes to see God in the everyday world around us, as well as in the detail of science, but just in the sky, in the creatures, in the plants, in the things that are around us. About training ourselves, in a sense, to encounter something of God there.
I just wanted to invite Ben as a pastor. Ben, if you were faced with this passage, it's coming up, you're going to preach on it. It's your chance to grill Dave. What kind of questions would you be asking as you came to it, as you started, to approach this?
I'm always interested in the how would you open up your preach to captivate the audience, the audience. It's terrible. Church, congregation. When you're,
it depends where I'm at. I mean, last couple of weeks ago, I was in a Baptist church in Croydon, and they wanted me to talk about climate and food, actually. But I started off with talking about the wonder of creation. So I took along some photographs with me. I took along a photograph of the aurora, because I'd taken that a couple of days before. But I took along some photographs of a willow tree in our garden, which we've grown up this year. We normally cut it back, we let it grow this year, and then we noticed this grey furry thing on the bark. So I Google lensed it. It turned out to be a willow aphid, an aphid particular to willow. And then we noticed there were wasps and hoverflies and hornets and ants and ladybirds all over this tree. And a lot of them had come to feed on the honeydew that the aphids produce. So within this one tree, you had this entire community of creation, which actually were gaining food and giving food away. So that was an in at that point. For me, that was a wonder. If I could use that this Sunday as well, because it's about the wonder of creation, and that's something in this passage as well. Draw on that. Actually, this time it's a seaside church, so it's a place I used to go to as a child for holidays. So I'm going to talk about being on the beach, and I'm going to use those phrases. There's bits in the passage where God says, "I told the sea, this far you can come and no further," as my kind of link in. But actually, I'm then going to move on to the fact that they may have seen some changes on their beach. Because in the 40 years that I've been there, sea levels come up by 3 or 4 inches because of global warming. So that's the kind of in I'm using. I'm basically using it to talk about climate change this week, rather than just pure wonder of the world and science.
Great, thank you.
But in general, I always try and I often use personal experiences, which I think are going to connect with people or connect with the passage, or I'll think about something that they may have seen, in this case in the world of science, or some awareness they've got of climate change, to try and connect it in through that. So a soft start, you might say.
I often find that if you invite people to think about their own experience when they saw something that made them go, wow, and
Yeah,
want to thank God or worship God or
yeah,
something, you've always got something.
Mm.
Even if it's just something sat out the window or on the telly or,
yeah,
you know, there's always something.
yeah,
I think also particularly in the light of, the chapters before the suffering,
yeah.
it's a change of perspective, right?
It is, and the amazing thing is, as I said, God doesn't answer the questions about his suffering.
Yeah.
He just says this is creation. It's big. I made it. And he doesn't address his suffering, and that's why I feel a bit sorry for Job, really. But the questions of suffering, and that's part of the natural world. There are also going to be big questions for us, and people have wrestled with them through thousands of years, through Christianity and through Judaism and other faiths before that. So, I don't think that's the interesting thing, though. Although I have pointed out that because I've preached on this passage in different churches in different ways. It seems to me there is something of a connection with what God is doing here and what we experienced in COVID, actually. I think in COVID, people really valued those hours they could have outside in nature. They really began to connect with nature again to cope with the trauma of what they were going through. And I see something of that here as well. Job's gone through this terrible trauma. Maybe, sometimes when people are suffering, and even if he had an answer, it's not what they want. And maybe here, God knows, engaging with creation, looking, even with the way we do it now with science, actually, is something that can give us can help our sense of well-being in the face of the struggles of life. Really. I think that's another thing you might want to play with here. I've said to people in the past, you might be trying to forget COVID. But one thing don't forget is how valuable nature was to you then, and keep that going. And I think that's really valuable and important.
Great. Any last burning questions?
I have just one question, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
You spent some time in the Met Office, so I'm interested in how you see weather systems and patterns. I look outside and it's raining and it's miserable and it's like whether you see things differently, the patterns reflecting God's majesty, all of this I'm interested in that.
Yes, I probably do. I'm a bit weird. I was once in my office one day at the Met Office, and my initial work at the Met Office, and actually it was a thread all my way through, was thunderstorms. How do we predict the effects of thunderstorms on global weather and climate? And I remember my boss, it was a day with lots of thunderstorms outside, and my boss stopped at my door, looked out the window, and said, "That's your bread and butter out there." He was right, but I just a good thunderstorm is exciting for me. Not just the thunder and lightning, because that's what I wasn't interested in, but just the shape of them, the color of them. And I'm obsessive in looking at the Met Office weather app, looking at the radar and trying to say, is it right and where is it wrong? Because it sometimes is wrong. I guess it means I'm always looking. I sometimes say I'm always looking up in the day and the night at the stars and the clouds, and it just fills me with this sense of awe and wonder and fascination of the patterns that you see and the beauty that you see. And I do know, I know something about how the clouds form. You were talking, Ruth, in your introduction about that cloud seeding experiment over Dubai, and did that cause the massive storm they had earlier on the year that flooded the airport? I was talking to somebody yesterday whose flight was delayed because of that flood in the airport. It amazes me, actually. You have a very heavy thunderstorm, which, might flood an airport, but it all starts with a grain of dust or a grain of salt. Because without that kind of little particles in the atmosphere, the water vapor would never form a droplet in the first place. And no droplets and no rain. So, we often focus on the massive downpours and the big impacts they have, and they are getting worse because of climate change. That's the evidence. Although the one in Dubai, we don't know if that was climate change related. It's very difficult to say for one particular isolated incident. But that massive amount of rain that falls starts with this really small grain of salt in the atmosphere. And that's what we do with cloud seeding. We put more grains like that in the atmosphere to try and make the water condense, although it didn't cause that storm. It was just too big a storm. And that gives me a perspective on faith too, that God starts with small things and they build. And I think the other thing that working in weather has given me appreciation of, we have this kind of almost mythical saying that if a butterfly flaps its wings on the banks of the Amazon, you get a tornado 5 days later in Texas. Not quite true, but the principle is important, that out of small things, big things grow. And I think I've got more of appreciation through the weather that out of a mess, God can bring in some order to things. You see that continually in the world of science. We see that continually in meteorology. You see it right across the universe, that patterns emerge out of seemingly random processes. That seems to be something that's inbuilt into the universe. And that, again, that speaks to me something about how God works in the cosmos, in our world, in our lives, that in a bit like Job's case, his life was a mess. And yet God brought something out of that more positive for him in terms of his relationship with God. So there's some of the things that I learn as I look at the world around me through the lens of a meteorologist, really.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. And if you want to know more, there are a series of films called God Saw That It Was Good, which are on the resources list for this month's resources on Job. So do have a look at that. Ideas of wonder and beauty and science and faith. And look out next summer for a book called Divine Windows, Glimpses of God in Science's Vision, which will be published next year. So that's all we've got time for. I'm so sorry. We could ask so many more questions. The conversation will continue, no doubt. Dave, it's great to hear your passion for science, passion for ministry, and the way they enhance and interact with each other, the way that it's so normal just to bring something as relevant in science into the life of the church. The more we learn, the more we experience of the world, the more those big feelings we can have sparked by the scientific process, the more we can worship God. Just bring that in a very normal way into the life of the church. So thank you so much, Dave. Thank you, Ben. There's probably some official things I need to say to finish. So if you missed the first session of our Creation Care course, you can still join us on the 20th of November at 7:30 p.m. GMT, either in person in Cambridge or online. We'll have the theologian Ruth Valerio and the scientist Deepa Senapathy speaking to us, and there are 3 more sessions with other scientists and theologians after that in January, February and March. We also have a course on living and dying well on Saturday the 9th of November in Cambridge and online. And there is a whole wealth of resources from this project, podcasts, bite-sized resources, and many other things. And you can also choose to be part of our Faraday Churches network by signing up for a monthly email newsletter, or if you don't like emails, you can get a weekly WhatsApp. And for details of all of these things, please go, as well as Googling Dave Gregory and looking up all his work. Now you're intrigued, please also go to faraday.institute /churches.